Aloha, listeners and viewers. Welcome to Intermission, a conversation series between artists. Intermission is the Hawaii Chamber Music Festival's exclusive online channel with Broadcast Hawaii. I'm your host, Chris YICK, the founder of the festival, and today we have special guest Mr. David Kim with us. And Mr. Kim needs no introduction. He is the concertmaster of the world-famous Philadelphia Orchestra, and we crossed paths about 2-3 years ago when he was just starting off as a distinguished artist at the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings. And since then, Mr. Kim has been wonderful for the school, and we've grown a relationship, and he's here to talk about his story. So I guess, aloha, David. How are you doing?
I'm good, Chris. So happy to join you. Thanks for inviting me.
So, being one of the most busiest concertmasters in the country, in the world, and now quarantine, now COVID, how have you dealt with this pandemic, essentially?
Well, it's part of the reason I'm so super busy is not because I'm so great. It's because I've got this kind of illness that all professional musicians have. They want to be asked to play concerts, and
Sure.
they'll do anything. We just want to be
Sure.
playing and making money and all that stuff.
Sure,
And
sure,
so
sure.
it's been kind of a forced leave of absence from what I've been doing for my whole life, which is playing concerts and teaching and just so much stuff. And it's been great. I mean, I have to say that it's taken me a little while to get into a rhythm, but it wasn't that hard. And it made me realize how kind of unhealthy my life was, like too much ego driven, kind of like, oh yeah, sure, I'll play this. My fee is, $7 billion, like just over the top
Sure.
playing. And so I'm just enjoying so much being at home. Of course, playing the violin less every day, but things are changing in the world. And so I'm doing a lot of stuff like this on Zoom, playing recitals for corporations and their workers online, all kinds of stuff that I never would have imagined I'd be doing.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, let's get right into that. I mean, you mentioned this has allowed you to take a step back. Do you think, in some ways, this pandemic has allowed musicians in general to really just take a break, take a pause, and just think about what they really want out of music? And, because I think a lot of us were just so busy. Oh, we have to do the next concert. Oh, next orchestra cycle. Or, oh, we have juries. We have recitals. But now it's just like we can really kind of see what we want out of music. But most importantly, I guess in your case, being so busy, this has allowed you to spend more time with family more than ever, right?
Absolutely. I have two girls. One is in college and one is about to go to college, just graduated from high school. And so I never would have imagined in a million years that I would have this entire summer at home with my two daughters and my wife, and me not being gone. Like, I've had all these trips canceled, both for the orchestra and on my own, going to festivals and stuff abroad. And here I am, weeks on end at home, and it's been wonderful. It's been a real invaluable time that I'll never get back, and so I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, I mean, with no foreseeable concerts in the future, how are you keeping your artistry? How are you keeping motivated to do all of the violin stuff?
Well, for the first about month and a half, almost 2 months of quarantine, I had this really good rhythm going. I was practicing Beethoven Violin Concerto every day, beginning to end. It's the Mount Rushmore of violin concertos, the greatest piece ever written for the violin, or almost the greatest piece ever written, period. And I never learned it as a young person. And suddenly, and I've always been a little intimidated by it. It's long, difficult to memorize, profound. So finally, for next season, I accepted, because I've always been asked along the way by orchestras, oh, would you play Beethoven? I'm always like, oh, no, I can't. I don't know it. I can't do it. So next year, I had 3 or 4 of them one in
Wow.
Oklahoma, one in the outskirts of Philadelphia, one in Montana, kind of spread out. And
Sure.
I realized that I needed to really get going early on preparing for this, and so it was really solid in my memory and all that. And so
Hmm.
I thought, well, you know what? This is a perfect time. So every day, I had a routine. Like I needed to do about four different things, and one was go up into our walk-in closet because my family was like, "We are so sick of hearing the violin. Could you go up to the closet?" So I'd go into our closet and practice Beethoven concerto, and it was so wonderful. I never got tired of it. I never felt like, oh, this is getting stale. Every day I would discover something new or make a
Sure.
little discovery. It was really fun, but I lost a little bit of my mojo when I think two of the four have, or three of the four have changed the repertoire. And
Oh,
yeah, they've changed it to like, wonderful stuff, but not the violin concerto.
sure.
So I still have one left. And so now I'm switching over to a little bit of technical work every day to try to kind of not get stale
Sure. Stay in
physically. And
shape.
so I'm
Yeah.
trying to, yeah, stay in shape. Exactly. Do my,
Awesome.
do my push-ups and sit-ups violin
Awesome.
wise every
Awesome.
day.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, now let's shift gears to sort of, I guess, your pre-COVID life. I mean, before COVID happened, what were some exciting concert appearances you were gonna have, and what were you excited to? Where were you excited to travel to?
Well, two festivals this summer I was particularly excited about. One was, and everything's postponed. I think it's
Sure.
very. I want to be careful never to say the word canceled. Everything is
Sure.
postponed. But the Prague Summer Nights Festival in
Hmm.
the Czech Republic, and just it looked like a wonderful place, and I was going to be there right around now. And
Hmm.
then the Taipei Academy and Music Festival in
Hmm.
Taiwan. That I went last year. A wonderful faculty, great students from all over the world. That was also supposed to happen, and it is going to continue, but I'm going to have to miss it because my daughter's
Sure.
graduating from high school. But
Sure.
those were two that I was really particularly sad when they said, "Oh, we're just going to, you know, for
Yeah.
out of abundance of caution, postpone."
Absolutely. Well, you are the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra, but I'm sure you've held multiple hats and you've had a very, I guess, fulfilling journey as a violinist. You want to let's get into that. I mean, what made you play violin? How did you go from being David Kim the student, David Kim the violin beginner to, David Kim the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra?
Well, my parents came to the United States from Korea in the early 60s. And at that time, a lot of people were
Hmm.
coming to the US to continue their studies, maybe master's degree, not
Sure.
so much as much undergraduate, but they were coming to further their studies. And my mother was a quite well known pianist in Korea. And when she came here and became pregnant, she decided before I was even born, she thought, I want to have a son and I'm going to train that son to become a concert violinist. And she loved the human voice more than any other instrument. But, if you're not born with it, if you're not born
Hmm.
with the instrument, then you're screwed.
Yeah.
So she thought, what's closest to the human voice? And that is the violin. So when I turned 3, Santa Claus brought me a 1/8 size violin. And she was a monster stage mom. I mean, like practicing every single day and lots of yelling and tears of bitter unhappiness.
For sure.
It was really intense. And yeah, it was increasing all the time, performing. I mean, by the time I was 8, I was already commuting to New York City to study with Dorothy DeLay. And it just, it was just a constant push, like a trajectory that had to keep going. And by the time I was 10, I was living in South Carolina and I would
Hmm.
fly on
Wow.
every other weekend for pre-college at Juilliard. And sadly, my mother passed away when I was 14 of cancer. And, I had been told my whole life that this kind of solo career thing was kind of a foregone conclusion. Like, oh, yeah, you're
Sure.
going to be a star. But that wasn't quite the case. I got close to some solo like
Hmm.
stardom. but couldn't really get up to the top level, or I would have a taste of it and then I would fall away.
Hmm.
Some great prizes at competitions and some wonderful invitations from orchestras.
Sure.
And then finally, when I was a little bit later than I should have realized, I was in my early 30s,
Hmm.
I had an epiphany after seeing this movie, Jerry Maguire, which stars Tom Cruise.
Uh-huh.
I was so affected by this movie. It just somehow spoke to me. It felt like, gosh, it's like speaking to me. And I kind of had an epiphany that I wasn't going to make it as a big solo violinist, and I better get a job and make a paycheck. And I was
Hmm.
married by then. And so I started the whole concertmaster journey. And that was the beginning of a long road. Also, that was not as quick as I thought it was going to be,
Sure, sure, sure.
and I was naive. Thinking, oh yeah, I'm a pretty good violinist. I could just learn a few excerpts and be ready to go. But it was much more than that, and learning the kind of language and skill of auditioning for an orchestra.
Sure. I mean, ever since being concertmaster, you before Philly, you were doing essentially concertmasters for other orchestras, right? You had some experiences in that field, but with your whole life being so wow, like solos this, solos that, competition this, competition that. When you shifted gears to concertmaster, would you say that that experience and sort of that musical side enhanced your artistry? Like, did you get any more fulfillment? Did you learn more as a musician just from being in that role rather than focus on the solos?
Yes, I guess there's a saying in music that every concert is a preparation for a future concert.
Sure.
So I feel that there's no way that I could have gone through that incredibly difficult audition process and become being named the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra if I hadn't had all those experiences in the past,
Mm-hmm.
all those everything,
Sure.
teaching little kids and playing strolling violin at an Italian restaurant and gigging and
Mm-hmm.
playing concerto. All of that came into play throughout those 4 rounds and the trial period. And
Mm-hmm.
even now, I've been on the job for 21 years, and when I get these incredible opportunities to play huge solos or
Mm-hmm.
lead the orchestra in very pressure-filled concerts or play concertos on tour with the orchestra, I realized that there's no way I could do any of those things without all the stuff that I've learned up to this point and continue to learn. It's just
Sure.
an
Sure.
ongoing challenge, and I would never be anywhere near the musician that I am without the experience of being concertmaster in Philly.
Sure. Absolutely. And you know, going back to sort of your upbringing as a violinist, it seems like you had a strong support system from your mom and Miss Dorothy DeLay. But were there any other big musical inspirations for you? I mean, did you grow up listening to any particular artist? Was there anyone you idolized? No, yeah, let's get right into that.
Yeah, I really love to listen to lots of recordings, and Miss DeLay always encouraged us to listen to recordings. The problem was
Mm-hmm.
I am not an idea guy. I love to listen to people and imitate them. And so I would come in and play something like so fast, and she would look at me like, "Have you been listening to High Fitz recordings? And your vibrato is suddenly so small and Russian, and like I was trying to imitate." And then
Sure.
so what I finally, well, I think that it's safe to say that Itzhak Perlman was my musical idol and hero,
Mm-hmm.
and so I listened to him a lot. But I listened to everybody, and all my students now, I'm constantly on their case trying to get them to listen to. Of course, there's so many wonderful violinists of our time
Sure.
right now,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I want them to listen to Oistrakh and Schering and
Mm-hmm.
Francescatti and just all the greats, and to hear that special quality and that poetry, the sound quality, to listen to old recordings of Heifetz and Chrysler,
Yeah.
and yeah, those are that's teaching that you can't buy. You just
Yeah,
have to
absolutely.
you just have to drink it in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember 2 years ago or so, you also simply said, since you were concertmaster of Philly, it's been like the gift that keeps giving, and I think what I'm trying to get at is, since you were concertmaster of Philly, this is what sort of opened the doors to a lot of things. We're talking about like solo opportunities, chamber opportunities, and educational opportunities. I mean, you're even on faculty at Mr. McDuffie's school. I mean, you want to let's dive into that. How was your experiences with those? Like, are there any memorable ones? What is your teaching philosophies since getting into it? I mean, let's just hear it all.
Well, I think that my teaching philosophy is let's just fly the airplane. Now, that means there's a wonderful book that came out recently a few years ago, called The Checklist Manifesto. And it's basically about how complicated things in life have to be accomplished by just making a checklist. Like, how do you build a 68-story skyscraper? Well, you go into the trailer and they have all these things, lists, and you just check off. Like, you have to start with this and go to that, and then that gets done, and then you go to the next thing. And sometimes I say this not at all negatively, but sometimes I watch masterclass videos on YouTube or online.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's not necessarily what that student needs at that moment in their life. They are not really vibrating correctly, or they're not really pulling the best sound out. And yet the teacher's talking to them so deeply about the philosophical meaning, and it's too deep. And I think that they need to fly the airplane, which means in the book, basically, like, I think it was in the 50s or 60s, the U.S. government was trying to build like this super fighter jet.
Yeah.
And the fighter, during the test runs, they kept crashing and killing the pilots, and they kept trying to figure it out. And they finally realized, after all these research, that, oh, wait a minute, we just need to make a checklist and leave it in the cockpit. And so if something goes wrong, they'll know what to do. And they still kept crashing. And then they finally realized, you know what, the checklist has to be shorter. And then they kept crashing. And then they said, well, wait a minute, we need to put first on the list, before dump all your fuel, put the landing gear down, or whatever the flaps are, all this stuff. First, they have to remember to fly the airplane, meaning they have to literally hold onto the steering wheel, look out the window, and fly the plane. Because if they're too busy doing all the other stuff, they're going to still crash. And I like to think of that with violin playing. Like, I understand that music is about intellectual philosophy and learning about the musicians and composers and all that, but you still have to play in tune. You still have to vibrate. You still have to, draw a nice bow. All these, just do the basic things well. Play in tune. Play with a nice sound. And so that, to me, is my teaching philosophy.
Wow.
And in terms of everything else in my life, I wouldn't say 100% of everything that I do is due to the title that I'm holding.
Sure.
But it's close. It's close. I'm so grateful and lucky and blessed, and I just can't imagine. Like, sometimes I look in the mirror after 21 years and I'm like, DK, how are you the concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra? It just is like beyond belief. Like, what? And then I'll get calls like, oh, would you come to our festival and something in Taipei? And I'm like, wow, this is like, as you say, Chris, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And so I don't take it granted for a day. It's just so amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. I think there's one aspect that people don't really realize, being an orchestral musician, yet alone a concertmaster, is in some ways the day-to-day life can be very exhausting, right? It can be very repetitive. It can just take up a lot of time in general. I mean, how do you, being in the position you are for 21 years, I mean, I don't even want to ask how many times you played Beethoven 5, for example. Like, there's no point in asking kind of stuff. But how do you deal with sort of keeping things fresh? How do you deal with just living your life on top of it? Because there's a lot to do, right? In addition to just the orchestra.
Right. There's no question, when we are in the throes of the season and we're traveling and get back at 1 a.m. from Carnegie Hall, and then we have a children's concert the next morning at 9:30. It's like, it really is exhausting. And with big orchestras, the intensity level is so high, and the nerves, intensity, the concentration that needs to, the focus that needs to be there, like 100%.
Yeah.
It is really exhausting. And so
Yeah.
I'm trying very hard to, exercise, stay strong in my Christian faith, all these things
Hmm.
will help me get through. But there are times when I fail miserably.
Sure.
But, thankfully my colleagues are very forgiving, and the maestros, everybody's busy. Everybody's doing many things,
Yeah.
musicians all over the world who are in the greatest orchestras have, maybe a side gig, maybe they sell mouthpieces or reeds, or maybe,
Sure.
who knows, or
Sure.
end
Sure.
pin business or end pin sharpening business.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just,
Absolutely.
we all stay busy. And then we have, of course, our families at home, and,
Hmm.
hobbies. I love to play golf. I like to hunt in the
Sure.
wintertime.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, like having families and stuff, but in your case, being an orchestral musician, you have your double rehearsals, you have the two concerts a week kind of thing, like on a normal masterwork schedule, whatever. Like, how did you find it I guess not difficult, but just hard to allocate time to both sides, right? Because you be at home, but then all of a sudden maybe you come home really late from a concert. Like, how did you juggle with all of that, sort of with, I guess, having kids and a
Well,
family?
pretty poorly, Chris. I think that many parents, when you talk to them later in life, many
Hmm.
of them have regrets. And they say something like, well, if I had to do it all over again, I would spend more time with my family, and
Sure.
I would be less beholden to my job and my career.
Hmm.
And I would like to say exactly the same thing. I have this kind of insatiable urge to play concerts and to be famous and all that
Sure.
stuff at the expense of my family. So there's
Hmm.
always collateral damage when you see somebody who has a certain amount of success, and it's not always as simple as, yep, they did their best, they worked hard, and they did great, and there's no hard feelings or collateral damage at all. Family's intact.
Sure.
I believe that there is always a toll taken somewhere,
Sure.
and I feel that, but not to the point of, self-loathing. But
Sure.
I do definitely feel that I could have balanced it better, and I'm still trying to figure that out. I like almost every season, maybe every 2 seasons, I have this huge like breakdown, like, oh my gosh, I should not be this overscheduled.
Yeah.
I don't want to say busy. Busy sounds like, oh, I'm so important, but just overscheduled.
Yeah.
And so I try to set parameters for myself, new parameters for myself all the time, and give myself some boundaries so I don't overschedule, which is absolutely my big go-to mistake.
Sure. 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 I've actually always been curious at your time so far at the center. How have you juggled like a week when you're teaching at McDuffie and then you have to come back and play a whole concert cycle? I mean, we're talking about you're getting on a plane, round trip, driving an hour and a half to Macon, or I guess 3 hours round trip, and then you're teaching. And I mean, obviously, I'm sure you can comment, like maybe you get a lot of fulfillment out of the teaching, but just from the literal physical exhaustion, how do you cope with that, juggling all these things?
Well, you know, yeah, I'm a big exerciser. I love to exercise, and I always try to keep and make time for,
Mm-hmm.
um, just physical activity. And, uh, sometimes I try to keep like a good um, diet, like a plant-based diet, to try to keep
Sure.
my energy up, things like that. My faith, it's hard to say, but I think part of my ability to do this kind of crazy thing is I'm blessed and cursed with a pretty fast metabolism, and
Sure.
inner um, my engine is calibrated quite fast, so I can
Mm-hmm.
I can go and maybe not have too much sleep, and I'm constantly going. And if I fly back late at night from Georgia, but then right away next morning I'm back in rehearsal,
Yeah.
somehow can manage it. And but I'm in my late 50s now, and so I'm trying to recalibrate again
Sure.
as I get older. I can't be as crazy busy and do 15 things in one day as I
Yeah.
used to.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, what's also interesting to me is you mentioned earlier in our discussion of how like you were so focused on doing solos, concertos, and stuff. But in some ways, being a concertmaster also allows you to have that. I mean, did you find some love in the orchestral solo rep, like the concertmaster solos and major pieces, symphonies, that kind of stuff? And also, do you ever get nervous for those kind of performances? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of pressure, right? You have this great orchestra right behind you, right by your side, and here you are. You have to play the concertmaster solo for like Don Juan or Einhorn-Leben, whatever. I mean, I want to know your thoughts on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I get very nervous. As you say, the pressure is greater playing in the Philadelphia Orchestra than it is playing a concerto elsewhere with another orchestra.
Sure.
And it's if you're in an orchestra, if you're a member of an orchestra and you don't love the symphonic repertoire, then you have no business being there because it's relentless. Every week there's a new program or two. In the summertime, we'll play like 4 programs a week, and we're not talking small repertoire. We're talking like Mahler Symphony, La Mer, Shostakovich Symphony. It just is relentless, huge concerto, new music. Yes, I love the orchestral repertoire. And sometimes if I'm away for a week, concertizing, or we've had a vacation and I'll come back and the first rehearsal back, I'll just literally almost be blown off my seat because the sound of the orchestra around me is so awesome and beautiful. And it's just, I just can't believe that I'm a member of this organism that is so classy, and the sound is just out of this world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and let me ask you this then. In a time like this with COVID, with orchestras not necessarily in jeopardy, not all of them, but this is a huge change, right, for you guys, like to just not be able to play. But also, there's another aspect to it I'm sure you may have heard from just teaching is there's a lot of just uncertainty amongst people my age and my colleagues that like maybe having an orchestral job isn't the way to go, or maybe music isn't even worth having a career anymore with this pandemic because it's exposed a lot of things. Is there any sort of words of encouragement or advice that you can give to like help us with that those kind of thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you guys have to remember, you young guys have to remember that making a career in music is a marathon and not a sprint. You have to be relentless, but on the long road. You have to not give up and be relentless. And I think this whole COVID crisis has created actually more kind of options and creativity and chances for discovery for musicians. I mean, look what you created here, this wonderful kind of separate entity connected to your music festival. I'm not sure that you would have done this if not for the COVID crisis. I think you would just be organizing concerts and inviting artists to Hawaii and all that. But there's something amazing that's going on. And of course, we're all on social media, and you see from even the smallest community orchestra, people are posting performances online, all the way up to the Berlin Philharmonic people. Everybody in between is posting stuff all over and being very creative. Like one person will cover 17 different voices and all that stuff. So what I'm saying is, let's take this opportunity, all of us, myself included, to keep our eyes open to new ideas, to new opportunities. And this too will pass. This COVID crisis is going to pass. And concert halls will reopen, and the music scene will come back and be healthy. And it's just one of those phases in life where we're going to look back many years from now and say, wow, that was scary, but now it's so neat that we're doing this. And it's going really beautifully. And thank goodness we had that time to take a moment and reassess or whatever. I firmly believe that. So just basically all you young people should be open to anything, open to creating stuff, open to being involved, whatever you're asked. If you're asked to do something, just say yes. Just try everything. and then keep the long view, understanding that there will be moments of failure. You get back up, dust yourself off, try again, try again. You can just keep
Mm-hmm.
going. And then eventually it kind of sorts itself out, and you very well may not end up exactly where you thought you were going to be within
Yeah.
music, but um, that's why you take the journey. The journey is so fun and full of adventure.
Sure, absolutely. Well, you mentioned being in your position for your career. You've had fun and fulfilling moments, but I think there's another aspect that people don't realize. Being a musician, there's a lot of relationships involved. You form a lot of friendships, and you find essentially like a second family. I'm sure you could say that the orchestra has been your second family, and other colleagues. And I mean, in some ways, the music world is also so small, because I think one of my first discussions with you asked me where I was from. I told you I was from Hawaii, and then and then you mentioned how like my orchestra teacher, Kathy Hafner, was one of your like teachers in Buffalo, New York, or something. And then also you mentioned how like you and Mr. McDuffie were just like you guys met at Juilliard, you guys met at Aspen. So it's all these sort of path crossing. I mean, how have relationships formed in your career, and do you cherish them? Like, are they your great friends that become family to you? Do you love playing with these individuals? Like, I just want to hear it all.
Yeah, I think, without being arrogant about it, I think that what I excel the most at in my career
Sure.
as concertmaster of the Philly Orchestra is the relational part. Um,
Sure.
More than playing the violin, more than leading the orchestra, more than fundraising, more than anything, I feel that I happen to be an extrovert, and that helps. And I love meeting people and having friendships and relationships and nurturing those
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And through that desire, I end up being a better fundraiser, being a better teacher.
Sure.
I have, as musicians, we meet people along the road our entire lives, and we keep seeing them again and again, especially nowadays with Facebook and stuff. It's unbelievable the number of relationships that have been rekindled in the
Sure.
last couple of months. People I haven't talked to in 30 years
Sure.
are in contact from New Zealand and Australia and all over the world, and
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that, and it energizes me. And um, if I could offer another bit of advice for young people, that is that
Mm-hmm.
you just have to be easygoing, or at least easy to work with. If
Sure.
you're a stubborn, insisting on your way, thinking about yourself before you think of others, all
Mm-hmm.
those factors will prevent you, no matter how well you play,
Sure.
will prevent you from really reaching where you want to be. You might, you'll still get some nice opportunities if you're a wonderful player and everything, but really to get that sense of satisfaction where you want to go, you have to be a warm person. You have to be able to listen to your friends. You have to be empathetic. You have to be kind. You have
Yeah.
to be
Absolutely.
flexible. All those qualities. And I'm not talking about just music. It could be anything, medicine or engineering. It could be anything.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mr. Kim, I mean, let's slowly start to wrap things up. But you have had an amazing career, and you still have a stellar performing career as well. But what now? It seems like not this is the end, or you have nothing more that you want. But you've had everything essentially. You've had the solo opportunities. You have had the title of being one of the concertmaster of one of the greatest orchestras, and you get to teach a lot, and you get to travel. Music has essentially been a great thing in your life. But what's next? I mean, do you have any thoughts on what you want to do, or is this everything comfortable and this is how you want things to just sort of ride in the sunset? Is there any other career ambitions you have?
Well, God willing, I just turned 57 a few days ago. So, I mean, it seems like, if all things were equal, it seems like kind of a median shelf life for concertmasters might be around 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm at 21 now. So 21 years, maybe another 8, 9 years, 10 years in
Sure.
the job. we'll see. But age is the great equalizer, and age can, for a musician, affect us just like an athlete. I'm a huge sports fan. I'm a huge
Sure.
fantasy football player. All and I'm like, oh, I'm not drafting that running back. He's 27. He's over the hill. He doesn't have the quickness. The reflexes are not the same as when he was, last year.
Sure,
So
sure.
it's kind of the same with us musicians, and we need to um, physically, we need to be able to adjust with our aging bodies. Um, and we'll see. I'm just hoping that I don't end up being one of those musicians that should have retired long
Sure.
ago. And, it just happens. It's human nature. People are afraid, I think, to retire. I
Yeah.
think the spouses of orchestral musicians are afraid for their spouses to retire because they don't want them at home 24/7 and without any income and twiddling their
Sure.
thumbs and bothering them. So I think that for me, part of my job is to continue to keep my skills at a high level, to
Yeah.
be able to lead the orchestra well, to play at the highest level, but also to start perhaps looking towards post orchestra life. And for me, I think that means teaching. So I
Really.
love the Glenn Dictorow model. He left the Philharmonic and went right to LA and started teaching at USC and
Yeah.
wonderful position there. And so I could see myself perhaps maybe not leaving Philadelphia, but at least traveling, and I hope at McDuffie Center for Strings in Macon, Georgia.
Sure.
Wonderful school. I would love to continue to teach there, and I'll see what my body tells me. And I think I have so many wonderful, wonderful friends in the orchestra. Um, I'm hoping that they will start, maybe not too subtly giving me hints when it's time to start thinking about hanging them up, and also my family. And I certainly don't want to overstay my welcome, but if I could get another 7, 8, 9, 10 years out of this incredible career,
Sure.
I would be so grateful.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess another question is, in your 21 years of being the concertmaster, what has been the most memorable performance? You've had a lot. I mean, is there anything that really just resonates with you in all these years?
Not one, Chris. There have been many, I have to say.
Sure.
I mean, I could quickly list a few. Like I remember one Alpine Symphony with
Hmm.
Dutoit in Vail, Colorado, and I remember I was kind of on the verge of tears afterwards when I saw him in the wings, and after thanking him, I just couldn't talk. It was
Hmm.
just so emotional. Um, let's see. Some concerts at Carnegie Hall have been incredible. I did a Scheherazade again with Dutoit at
Hmm.
Carnegie once. That was, packed house. That was one I'll never forget. A lot of kind of concerts like that. Bruckner Symphony with, I think it was Bruckner 4 with Eschenbach at the Musikverein in
Wow.
Vienna. Um, there's so many like that all over the world that have been super, super rewarding. And I just know that you just know. You kind of
Yeah.
look in the mirror afterwards and you're like, wow, I will never, ever forget that moment.
Wow. Absolutely. So, I think it's really cool that you really like sports and athletics and stuff. So let me, I guess, pose the final question. If it was your choice of rep, your final Philadelphia Orchestra concert, this is before you hang up the cleats, before your jersey goes up the rafter, what would you want to play with the orchestra?
Something very, very middle of the road repertoire wise. I would hope that it weren't a piece by slightly obscure composer or a piece that is unfamiliar to the orchestra. I would want something like Beethoven Fifth or um, Shostakovich Five, or you know, even Dvorak New World, or
Sure.
when I know a piece really well, um, I basically play almost the entire symphony by memory because I can. I basically just glance down, my eyes just scan the music
Mm.
for a second, and then I'm looking up at the conductor the whole time or at my colleagues. I would want that freedom. And so that means something that I knew really well, Dvorak, uh, um, G minor symphony. I don't know, something that I wouldn't have
Sure.
to really look at the stand, and just to be able to enjoy it with all my friends, dear friends and colleagues in the orchestra.
Awesome, awesome. Well, listeners and viewers, I hope you liked and I guess saw what everything we had to say about Mr. Kim. For those of you listening and tuning in, we hope you subscribe to Broadcast Hawaii, and we'll be having more episodes just like this with Mr. Kim. Yeah, David, is there any last thoughts? Anything you want to share? We should definitely bring you out to Hawaii sometime once this is all over.
I would love it. There are two things I love more than anything in terms of activities. One is fishing, and the other is golf. And so I would love to come to Hawaii someday just to do those two things and make a little music too. But Chris, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. You're just a wonderful musician, but also a terrific interviewer, just so personable. And I really enjoyed today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Kim. I guess we'll cross paths in Philly or New York since we're a lot closer now.
Absolutely. I count on it. Thanks,
All right.
Chris.